something that you read quite some time ago, and that you also had a chance to meet Alistair Gray at some point. I'm wondering if you can just say what your first impressions of the book were, and what interested you in eventually adapting it, but then maybe why it was such a long time until you actually did.
Well, yeah, I did read the book around 2009, I think, and I immediately fell in love with it. I hadn't read anything like it, and it was mainly the character of Bella Baxter that I was drawn to. I just thought she was just this incredible, unique human being. But the world of the novel itself, and all the characters and the premise of it, and how it allowed you to explore the story of this woman that has a second chance in life to experience the world in her own terms, and the tone of it, the humor in it. It was a very rich, unique piece of material. So I immediately, first of all, I was very surprised that when I learned that it hadn't been turned into a film, because it was written in the 90s, like early 90s. I immediately contacted Alistair Gray, went to Glasgow and met him. He was a wonderful, unique, energetic man. He was in his 80s, I think, when I met him, or late 70s. He was a wonderful painter as well. He did most of the illustrations in his books. Very, very inspiring presence. So he saw Dogtooth before meeting me, and as soon as I got to his house, he just opened the door and dragged me outside and started walking around Glasgow, and showing me various places that have inspired him and that he spent all of his life. Walking around in the cemetery, the university, the park, this, that, the other. It was just, he didn't just stop, and I would have to try and keep up with him. And in the end, he just went back to his house and said, like, I saw your film Dogtooth. I think you're a very talented young man. You're welcome to make my novel into a film. And said, okay, that's it. Okay, bye now. And we left. So it was, it was a really wonderful experience. And of course, I immediately tried to get it going, but it was very difficult at the time. I think one of the reasons was that I had only made Greek films at the time. I think I had just made, when I met him in 2011, I also had just made Alps. I hadn't made an English language film, certainly not of that scale. So when I said, like, oh, I want to do this, people were like, no. Something more simple. There was that. I think there was also the fact that, this kind of story at the time wasn't, people weren't so interested in it. Anyway, I always had it, in my mind. I always wanted to make it, and after I made The Favorite, I felt that it was the right time to try it again, and it worked.
And I'm wondering just, it's so exciting to have this great group of craftspeople who worked with you, but I'm just going to say, in acknowledgement of a strike, there's obviously a key figure missing here. But I'm also curious, because I've heard you say in a previous interview that you never work on developing a script with an actor in mind in case you can't get them or they're not available. So I'm just curious if you can talk about at what point in your thinking it might be time to do this again, that you knew that Emma Stone would be the person that you wanted to work with? And then again, at what point she also became a producer on the project?
Well, it was early on, while we were making The Favor, that I think we had just started writing the script with Tony McNamara, and we had a wonderful experience with Emma working on that, and I think during it I mentioned 4 Things to her, and she immediately got very excited, just, the idea of it. I think she still hasn't read the book, by the way. I don't know if I'm supposed to say that.
Well, it's not available again until it comes out next week, so.
But I think it was my fault. Like I said, I told her about the story, but I said, don't read the book because it's very complex. It has a different holistic structure. So, we're working on the screenplay. You'll read that. Maybe she's read it by now. I shouldn't say that. Anyway, so
You're only in front of like a few hundred press people, so no worries.
So it was during The Favorite, so I mentioned it to her, and she got very excited immediately, and as soon as we had a draft, I showed it to her, and she was totally on board, and she wanted to learn everything about it, and we started discussing about the world, and how it would look, and other people that we would work with, so it kind of became a natural thing that she became a producer on the film, and you could see she wanted to be involved in everything and look at everything, and so I guess midway I also knew in my mind that it was her who was going to be Bella.
As I mentioned before, you've assembled this incredible group of people to work with, some of whom you've worked with before, some of whom you haven't, some of whom have worked on feature films before, some who haven't. And I'm just wondering if you can say a little bit about when you're putting together your cast and crew, whether you think about how they're gonna, how do you go about putting together that group of people, whether you think about how they'll work with each other. For example, your production designers hadn't worked with each other before.
And never since. No, I'm kidding.
I guess I'm asking you to maybe introduce them.
Yes,
and say
yes,
what,
I
and
get
say
it
what
now.
it is. Yes, about
We
each
do
one.
love one another, don't we?
So it's a very instinctive thing, I think. You can't really know how it's going to work. So with Jerskin, for example, it was very hard for me up until now to work with a composer with original music in my films. Initially in my earlier films I didn't use any music or composed music as a soundtrack. At some point I figured out a way to work with music by working during the edit with existing pieces of music, and then I couldn't find the exact same tone with anything else that would be produced afterwards. So it was very particular how I could work with music, but I always was hoping that at some point I would manage to do that, and I just listened to Jerskin's first album, and although I can't even describe what it is, I don't know if you can, but for some, it's I'll say that it's not straightforward that you think, oh yeah, this guy, it'd be great to write music for a film. But there was something in it that it just felt so right about it, and I said why don't I just give it a go? And we met and we discussed, and he can tell the story from then on. You want to tell the story?
Well, I guess I'm gonna
Or should I
turn
just say
it around.
something about it?
No, it's okay. Because I think what
What's the structure here?
I don't mean to confuse you. I think, in fact, what I'll do is ask each of you maybe to say one thing about a choice you made in terms, because you created this wonderful world which seems very cohesive on screen, and yet, of course, you're all contributing your own part to it. So, for instance, starting with Robbie, I'll just ask you about lens choices, right? Because there's a very particular point of view.
That's my one thing.
Well, you can
No,
suck in another one if you
as
don't
far
want
as
to.
well, I kind of with working with Yorgos, he tends to have an idea of, or trying to come up with a language visually. So the favourite, obviously, the first time I worked with him, and he kind of had like a big wide lens I wouldn't have used before, and it was like quite a exciting way to film from my perspective. So I was learning a lot. So, you know, I like to think why I'm on the job is because I'm an enthusiastic, proficient operator. And Yorgos is saying, all right, well, let's try this, and you know, let's have a go at a new idea visually here. And obviously, Poor Things is a very, you know, exciting film for visuals, and we kind of just decided to expand on what we've done in favour of it and try out, you know, even, you know, different lenses that would kind of visualise the world. But we like a wide lens. It's fun. It's the story. I think, you know, it's it kind of expands that world in a good way.
And Holly, for the costumes.
What was the question?
You say one thing.
I mean, my one thing then is that I think that, you know, Shona and James and I and Yorgos, we worked very cohesively together actually. So lots of the conversations were with all of us. And I think that the one thing really is just being allowed to play and experiment and come up with stuff, because you know, Yorgos' way of working isn't prescriptive, which means that you've got this much more exciting project ahead of you, and you have to find something, and you have to come up with stuff, and there's, you know, so that's the sort of distinguishing feature, I would say, of a project like Poor Things.
I love the sort of mixture of materials in the costumes, and that the way it sort of plays with the idea of a period piece, and that some parts of it seem incredibly modern and some seem historical. Can you talk a little bit about?
Yeah, sure. So that most things are really rooted in the late 19th century. They're rooted in the 1890s. Most pieces, but there's lots of mixing, as you say, lots of contemporary fabrics. Most of the fabrics were really chosen because of their textural qualities. We use lots of polyurethane and latex, and also in the way that I put together the clothes was not conventional to the period. So that's how they feel modern, really. So often there are, you know, she's often wearing nothing on the bottom half, which is obviously not true to periods. But actually the shapes themselves are very often taken from original pieces or patterns, you know, some references.
And for the production design, you, as I mentioned before, you had not worked together before. Can you talk a little bit about how you approached doing the production design together?
James and I come from very different backgrounds. I don't have any experience in film, and James has a lot. So I worked from the bottom up, and he worked from the top down, and I went small details and up, and he went big details and down. And we kind of met in the middle and sort of bashed it out like that. But it was a comfortable way of working, because I'm obsessed with details and colour and texture, and you have a very practical and architectural view on what we had to achieve, which was enormous. We built 4 cities. Yeah.
Absolutely, I really like composite sets, or sets that, you know, composite sets of rooms off one another that you can go to. But with this, with Poor Things, it's epic. We have like 4 big composite sets actually become something more like an immersive set where you, if you look at something like Lisbon, that's actually a theme park. It's kind of like a Disney theme park. We had the biggest stand stage in continental Europe at the time, and you could wander around that place from the hotel. You know, when Bella goes wandering around Lisbon, that's literally what you can do. And for something, when you're shooting with those wide-angle lenses that Robbie and Yorgos tend to use, you know, we were building sets with people. Nobody builds this big anymore, and I'm like, well, we do, you know, because you want to give these guys and the cast the most flexibility to put the camera wherever they like. We don't have lots of green screen. Everything that was in those sets is really there. Painted backdrops, cutouts, you know, hugely amounts of techniques that nobody ever does anymore, really. And stuff that I'd only learned about film school, you know, like making miniatures and cutouts and the view from like the top of London. It's all kind of old trickery, but we also then mixed in LED screens and with the shit, and so everything was on the table. And that was what was really exciting to me, was to be able to just do stuff that we might never get to do again.
And so I'll come back to you just to talk a little bit about, how you approach doing a feature film, this feature film.
Yeah, I don't know, I didn't do any film stuff before, and I mainly did a lot of pop songs. I really like writing pop music, because it's very, you get to play with feelings in a nice adolescent way, and it's very indulgent, and you get to talk about yourself a lot. And it was, in terms of making decisions on the film, I was really lucky to have, the first thing I looked at was Tony's script, and I was really struck by the feelings in it, and the way in which all the characters express their feelings. And obviously, they can see that the film is that Bella's a kid and whatever, but all of the characters, like Godwin and Duncan and so on, they're so childish, and they're so like unable to hold in if they feel like they, you know, there's some kind of injustice or they're upset about something, and it comes out in this really like extremely endearing and kind of cute and embarrassing way. And that's basically like my toolbox musically, is just talking about feelings in a very embarrassingly kind of open way. And that was, I think, my in to the script. There was also the cosmetic side, making sure that it like could keep up with how extraordinarily imaginative all of the production and the costume designs were. But at the core of it, I think it really had to be very emotionally vulnerable and not in control of itself emotionally at all. Like really, kind of embarrassing.
And in terms of sort of moderating the vision, I know in the past sometimes you've watched movies with your crew, not as a specific reference, but just inspirational. And I'm wondering if you did that on this film, and if so, what you might have watched.
I mean, we certainly didn't watch films together, but I think at some point there was like a long list, very diverse, like it,
Very obscure.
yeah, which was, it's just inspiration basically, and for various different things, from, for the production design to atmosphere to humor to while we're writing the script, like things like Muriel, and we looked at Dracula, that, they used some techniques. It was one of those films that, felt that had some kind of relation to, what else was it? Like it was
Shit that sails, the beast.
Oh yeah, Fellini, of course.
Fassbender.
Yeah, Fassbender.
Binder.
It's always a tricky one. For the movement, the camera and the zooms that we used, and so it was like very, you kind of like pinpoint, anything particular that you actually end up seeing here, I guess. Paul Pressburger for how they used the
Paramount as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
The original one.
Yeah. So, yeah. It's like you know.
I'm also interested in the way you developed, I'll just call it the physical language of Bella's movement, which is quite unique and extraordinary.
Well, I mean, it's mainly Emma who's unique and extraordinary. Because I mean, you can't tell someone how to do this. It's just, I mean, I couldn't believe it afterwards. Like especially when I was editing, because when you're actually making the film, it's like there's a lot of stress. You're trying to get things, and you're hoping it's working. But then when I was looking at it while we were editing, it was like I was really just amazed by her. What we did together, and I tried to help her with, was to figure out what the stages were of her physical development, including language as well, which we tried to then, also make part of the script itself. But it was just dividing the script into stages for the evolution of the character, and then we rehearsed. Okay, stage one. Like, how does she walk? How do you move? How do you speak? What sound do you make? And how do you sit? How do you do this? How do you do that? How do you eat? Okay, then stage two. Again, the whole thing. Also, it was very helpful because she, especially in the beginning, she had to do, the earliest Bella and the last part of the film, back to back. Because we were shooting in London, and that was a set that we had to strike. So she starts in London in the beginning of the film and at the end of the film. So she has to go from, stage one Bella to stage 10 or whatever it was, in a couple of days. So it was really difficult, I think, but it did help that we had, structured it in such a way where we go like, okay, this part of the script is stage 3, so this is how you do it. And it was still very, complicated and difficult, but she's just incredible. The vulnerability of it, and the sensitivity, and the humor of it, and it's just so difficult to do, and I just don't know how she did it.
I mean, you usually have, I think, pretty robust rehearsal, and I'm curious if that, if it's a rehearsal just to make the characters discover their character more deeply, or if it ever has ramifications that need to be responded to by production or costume or script.
Yeah, I don't know if someone would call them robust if they saw us rehearsing. It's mainly, playing games and having a lot of fun, and ridiculing ourselves, me included. Just feeling comfortable with each other and trying things without saying, okay, this is how it's going to be, or analyzing things. It's mostly a period of just getting into it and getting the script and the words in the actors in a way that is not at all intellectual, like just say the words during a game, just make fun of it or whatever. Don't think about what you're going to do when you're actually doing it. So it kind of allows them this freedom, and they get to know the words, from a very different perspective to something very literal and intellectual. So that's the process, and sometimes some physical, aspects of it do influence things, like for example, when they were dancing in Lisbon, that dance in Lisbon, the restaurant, I guess we figured out that we needed a much bigger space for them, for that when we were designing, or how we're going to film certain things, and sometimes script changes, like what I was saying before, like when we were devising the various stages of Bella's character, there was the evolution of the language, and when you actually do it, you realize that maybe you need other things, like the synonyms situation. We started like coming up with that stuff during rehearsal, and that she would, come up with all these new words, and she was excited to use, and she would just, so things like that. I think more detailed, but it kind of affects the whole thing.
Okay, so I think we're ready to open it up to audience questions. We'll start with you there in the short sleeves. Yes, midway back, looking over your shoulder. Yes, you. Yes. Oh yes, looking for a mic. I see.
Hey guys, thanks so much for coming. I was wondering if you could talk about the color theory of the movie, because there's so many instances where atmosphere and elements of the film are not what they would normally be. They're very unusual colors, and I was wondering your exploration of that, or were there any areas where you're like, no, that's not the right fit for this setting?
Well, I'll do the colour.
Yeah.
I think the colour was always the main thing, to try and make it as kind of as wrong as we could. We were trying to do that with many things, with the era as well, to try and make it not have a time, but we took a lot of inspiration for the colour from anatomical drawings, bodily fluids, the yucky ones and the beautiful ones, and everything in between. So I think that's where we went to, sort of pinks and saturated reds and lilac sort of trite colours. We always try to relate it to something a bit revolting.
With Lisbon, we did away with the blue, because Lisbon, Portugal, got a lot of tiles of the blue. We changed those to green, and there's a guy called Antonio, what's the French futurist guy. Alberto Robert. And looking back at his work recently, it's sort of like hugely influential on the colour palette of Lisbon and stuff, right?
Sort of like some psychedelic sort of pastels. He sort of was a futurist in the sort of Belle Epoque, so we looked to him for his colours as well. So we concentrated a lot on that.
And then we shot in black and white, so it was
Yes, right there midway. Yes, with the.
Hi, congratulations on the film. Such a brilliant, amazing film, right here, director. Great cinematography, production design, screenplay, and of course, a genius mind like you, director Yorgos Lanthimos. I'd like to hear from you your message to the society. It's so many things that I collect in this film, such as being polite to society, sexuality, religion. I'd like you to tell me a little bit of these dogmas that you've been exploring in your career. Would you please? Thank you.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's as you put it, like it's exploring, and it's like there's no direct message. I think it's mostly creating these conditions for characters and situations that you reveal conflicts in human behavior, the society around humans themselves, and experimenting and see what comes out of it. And then I think if it works for different people in different ways according to the viewer. I mean, their background, their culture, their story, how they perceive all of those things, and what they can take away from it. So that's what I've always been trying to do, not like enclose things and try and come up with a result and a dogma, but rather than asking questions and see what the questions that people that experience the film have to ask, or do they have an answer, the way that they experience them. Does it say something about them? And hopefully it's a never-ending dialogue. And even more so, if it would be much more interesting if you experience the film later again. Maybe you have different ideas and views about it, and questions or answers. So I hope that's the way it works.
Let's go in with the blue mask. Yeah.
Hi, congratulations everyone on the film, I loved it. I think, there's been a lot of discourse, a lot of debate over sex scenes in movies. Obviously, Bella's sexual awakening is a huge part of her journey, but I'm curious what your contribution, Yorgos, specifically is to that dialogue, as you said.
Well, the contribution is this. As you said, it was a very important part of her journey. We felt that we shouldn't shy away from it. It would feel very disingenuous to tell this story about this character who's so free and so open, and then be prude about the sexual aspect of it. So it was clear from the beginning, but also from the novel, from the script, from my discussions with Emma as well, and how we came up with those scenes, that she had to be free. There should be no judgment. The same way that everything else works in the film, the same the same way she learns about language and human suffering and love and science and politics. It's the same way she should be equally free about sex and anything else.
Okay, we probably have time for one last one, and we'll go dead center right there in the gray t-shirt. I like.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you very much. My question is for Mr. Lanthimos, and I suppose through the absence of your colleague and screenwriter, Tony McNamara, I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to your process adapting Alistair Gray's book, and specifically what led you to the decision to transpose the setting of the novel in Glasgow to London, and to replace some of the more specific historical context leading up to the First World War with steampunk aesthetics. Thank you very much.
With what was the last?
Steampunk.
We don't like steampunk.
They didn't like that.
Can someone get rid of that guy?
Well, I just felt like it was. I think the novel has this other layer to it that is, very political in a certain way, and it's almost like an essay about, the relationship from Scotland to the rest of the island, and which couldn't be part of what we were making. So if we were to make this film about this woman and kind of adopt her point of view and tell this story, I felt that it was more honest, from our part to just, place it, in London, make it more the same way that we created the rest of the world, which is like something more familiar and more international and more less specific in a way, and also working with all these American actors. It would be kind of strange, although Willem does a great job and representing the Scottish element, and actually we were very inspired by Alistair Gray himself and his presence, and so we he was very important to shaping that character. So we try to maintain that aspect of it through Baxter and that character.
Okay, I'm afraid that's what we have time for, but thank you so much for